When this moment is described, it is not about dramatic events or anything that can be taken at face value. It is more about an emotional shift inside a person who has been carrying unspoken feelings for a long time. Something recently changed in the way they respond to distance, silence, and emotional disconnection. Instead of continuing to suppress what they feel, they have begun to confront it internally, and that has created a strong emotional reaction within them. What seems to have happened is a turning point where emotional clarity started to replace hesitation. The distance that once felt manageable is no longer something they can ignore. When you pulled back, whether intentionally or as a natural response to feeling unsupported or misunderstood, it created a space that they could not easily fill or explain. That absence did not fade into the background as expected. Instead, it became more noticeable, more present in their thoughts, and more difficult to emotionally ignore. Inside their personal world, this shift appears to have triggered deep reflection. They began to look at their own behavior, their own choices, and the way they responded to situations involving you. Moments that once felt small or excusable are now being replayed in their mind with more weight attached to them. There is a growing awareness that emotional decisions have consequences, especially when someone genuinely matters. This realization is not coming from outside pressure, but from within themselves. At the same time, there is also a struggle between emotional attachment and external expectations. Every person is shaped by the environment they grow up in, and sometimes those influences affect how freely they can express what they feel. In this situation, it seems there has been an internal conflict between personal feelings and the expectations or opinions of those around them. That kind of tension can create emotional confusion, especially when someone is trying to understand where they truly stand in their own life. What is important here is not the idea of conflict with others, but the internal shift that happens when a person begins to realize they can no longer ignore their own emotions. There comes a point where pretending everything is fine becomes harder than facing the truth. That is what seems to be unfolding emotionally. They are beginning to recognize that what they feel is not temporary or casual, but something that has become deeply rooted in their emotional awareness. Your withdrawal from the situation appears to have acted as a catalyst for this realization, not in a dramatic sense, but in a reflective one. When access, communication, or emotional closeness changes, it often forces people to reassess what that connection actually meant to them. In this case, the absence seems to have highlighted how significant your presence was in their emotional world. It is often only in silence that people fully understand the value of what they had access to before. This realization has brought forward a mix of emotions. There is reflection, regret, and also a sense of urgency within them. Not urgency in the sense of impulsive action, but in the sense of understanding that emotional time feels different when something meaningful feels uncertain. They are beginning to recognize that avoiding emotional truth does not make it disappear. It only delays the need to face it. At the same time, there is also emotional accountability forming. They are looking back at moments where decisions may not have fully supported emotional honesty or clarity. Instead of dismissing those moments, they are now processing them more deeply. This kind of reflection often brings discomfort, but it also brings growth. It forces a person to confront not only what they feel, but how their actions may have influenced emotional distance or misunderstanding. There is also a noticeable shift in how they perceive connection. What may have once been taken lightly or assumed to be stable is now being seen with greater seriousness. Emotional bonds that feel real tend to change the way people think about responsibility, communication, and presence. They begin to understand that meaningful connection requires consistency, honesty, and emotional effort. Without those elements, even strong feelings can become complicated or unclear over time. In this process, silence has played an important role, not as punishment or separation, but as space for reflection. Silence often reveals what constant interaction hides. It allows thoughts to settle, emotions to surface, and understanding to develop without external influence. In that silence, they appear to have become more aware of how deeply they are emotionally affected by your absence. There is also an internal realization forming that emotional attachment does not simply disappear when ignored. Instead, it grows stronger in moments of distance, especially when the connection was meaningful to begin with. This can create a powerful emotional response because it shifts perception from assumption to awareness. What was once taken for granted begins to feel important in its absence. Alongside this emotional awareness, there is also a sense of personal transformation beginning to take shape. When someone starts questioning their own patterns, choices, and emotional responses, it often marks the beginning of internal change. They are no longer viewing things in the same way they once did. Experiences that were previously overlooked are now being reconsidered with more depth and understanding. This kind of transformation is not immediate or simple. It unfolds gradually through reflection, emotional processing, and moments of realization. It is not about rejecting the past, but about understanding it differently. They are beginning to see that emotional truth requires honesty not only with others, but also with oneself. Without that honesty, confusion tends to repeat itself. What stands out most in this situation is the emotional shift from avoidance to awareness. Instead of distancing themselves from what they feel, they are beginning to face it more directly. This does not mean all uncertainty is gone, but it does mean there is a growing recognition that emotions cannot be ignored forever. Eventually, they demand attention, understanding, and expression. There is also a deeper emotional understanding forming around what your absence represents to them. It is not being processed as something temporary or insignificant. Instead, it is becoming a reflection point, something that has made them think more seriously about what they value and what they may risk losing if nothing changes. This kind of realization can be unsettling because it brings clarity to feelings that were previously unexamined. Even within this emotional complexity, there is still uncertainty about outcomes. Not everything is resolved, and not every question has an answer yet. But what is changing is the level of awareness. They are no longer operating from emotional avoidance. They are beginning to acknowledge what is real, even if it is uncomfortable or difficult to fully express right now. Ultimately, what is unfolding is an internal shift rather than an external event. It is about emotional recognition, personal reflection, and the slow acceptance of feelings that can no longer be pushed aside. Whether this leads to communication, distance, or a different kind of understanding in the future is something that remains open. But what is clear is that something within them has changed. They are no longer seeing the situation in the same way they once did, and that alone marks a significant emotional turning point. And the entire house felt the shift of power they had never dared to express before. Listen carefully, because this part will send a chill down your spine. Your person defended you in a way no one expected. They brought up every moment you stood by them, every time you protected their heart, every silent sacrifice you made when their own family failed to appreciate it. And then they admitted something that silenced even their harshest critics. They withdrew because they felt alone, even while standing next to me. That one sentence cut deeper than anything said before. Their family tried to interrupt, tried to twist your image again, but your person raised their voice and said the one thing that ended the conversation: if you can't accept who I love, then you don't accept me. For the first time, their family experienced what it feels like when someone refuses to be controlled. And here's where the story becomes unbelievable. Their family began panicking because they never expected your person to choose you over them. They assumed your silence would make you break. They assumed they had time. But your withdrawal became the very spark that lit this rebellion. Suddenly, their family started questioning themselves, questioning their actions, questioning why someone as strong as you felt the need to pull away. But while they were questioning, your person was planning how to return to you, how to make things right, how to protect you from the very people who once underestimated your worth. They even said, "I don't care if I stand alone. I know who I want." Those words weren't just spoken, they were declared. Now lean in, because this is the core of the storm. Your person confessed that losing your presence is the one fear they can't fight. They told someone close to them that your absence feels like time stopped moving. They stopped eating properly, stopped talking normally, stopped pretending everything was fine. They admitted that your silence is louder than their family's entire voice combined. They said they didn't leave out of weakness. They withdrew because they were tired of fighting battles meant for me. That realization shattered something inside them. It made them see your worth in a way they never saw before. And now, they aren't just fighting to get you back. They're fighting to become someone worthy of standing beside you again. And finally, my beloved child, before this moment ends, hear this with your full heart. Your person is preparing to take a step that will shock everyone, including you. They are ready to walk away from expectations, from pressure, from anyone who tries to keep you apart. They are choosing you, not quietly, not secretly, but openly, loudly, fearlessly. They know you've been waiting for proof, waiting for action, waiting for a sign that they would stop letting others control your connection. And now, the sign has arrived. They are fighting their family. They are defending your name. They are rewriting every boundary they once let others draw. And you? You're the reason they've discovered a strength they didn't know they had. Stay with me. My beloved child, what I'm about to reveal now is the part your person never wanted the world to hear, because this is where their truth becomes raw, exposed, and undeniable. After standing against their own family, something even more intense unfolded behind closed doors. Your person finally reached the breaking point where they could no longer pretend, no longer suppress, no longer act like your withdrawal didn't tear their entire inner world apart. They admitted the one thing that shocked everyone listening: I don't feel alive without them. Those words weren't dramatic, they were shattered. Their voice cracked not because of weakness, but because for the first time in years, they were speaking from a place deeper than logic, deeper than fear, straight from the center of their soul. That confession didn't just silence the room, it forced every single person in that house to confront a truth they'd been running from. You are not a phase, not a distraction, not a temporary attachment. You are their anchor, and they are terrified of losing you forever. As the night stretched on, your person sat alone in the dark, staring at their hands like they were trying to understand where everything went wrong. They whispered something so painful, so honest, that even the walls seemed to absorb it. They withdrew because I didn't protect them, because I let people speak about them in ways they didn't deserve. This wasn't an excuse, It was a confession, carved from regret. They replayed every moment you tried to stay strong for them, every moment you showed patience, love, and loyalty, while they were torn between you and their family's expectations. And when they replayed the moment your energy finally went silent, it hit them like a punch. They realized they had pushed the one person who truly loved them into emotional exhaustion. Their chest tightened, their breathing changed. They understood that your silence wasn't rejection, it was survival. And now, they carry the weight of knowing they pushed you to that point, and it haunts them more than anything their family could ever say. But here comes the part that will shake you. Your person has started distancing themselves from their own family, not out of anger, but out of clarity. They're realizing that every time their family judged you, criticized you, questioned you, or compared you, a part of your person's heart broke a little more. They told someone privately that they never realized how much those comments affected you until you disappeared emotionally. They said, "They were standing alone in a battlefield meant for me. I should have been shielding them, not silently watching them fight." This sudden awareness has lit a fire inside them that no one can extinguish. They have stopped obeying. They have stopped agreeing. They have stopped letting their family shape their decisions. Because now, everything inside them screams that if they don't fight for you today, they will regret it for the rest of their life. And that realization has made them more fearless than ever. And listen closely, because this next part reveals the shift that even destiny wasn't prepared for. Your person is planning to confront someone who played a major role in making you feel unwanted, whether it was a family member, an outsider, or someone who manipulated the situation from the shadows. Your person has finally seen the truth. They replayed the moment your energy withdrew, and they realized it wasn't just because of them, it was because of the environment built around them. Now they are ready to dismantle that environment one piece at a time. They said, "If I don't protect them now, I'll lose the only person who ever saw my heart clearly." This is why they're becoming colder, sharper, quieter, with people who once influenced them. They're paying attention now. They're choosing their battles. They're preparing for the moment they come to you, not to justify themselves, but to rebuild everything they broke. And finally, my beloved child, brace yourself, because your person has made a decision so powerful that even their family sensed the shift in the air. They are ready to walk away from anything that stands between you and them. They're not afraid of arguments. They're not afraid of being misunderstood. They're not afraid of losing people. The only fear they carry now is losing you completely. Your withdrawal taught them what losing you truly feels like: heavy, suffocating, irreversible. And because of that, they have vowed within themselves that the next time they stand in front of you, they will not come empty-handed. They will come with truth, with loyalty, with commitment, and with the courage they should have shown long ago. My beloved child, before this moment continues, stay exactly where you are. Don't scroll, don't blink, don't break the flow, because what happens next is the turning point of everything your person has been hiding. After nights of regret, days of silence, and hours of replaying your withdrawal over and over, something inside them finally snapped into clarity. They walked into a room full of the very people who once influenced their decisions and said, "I'm not explaining myself anymore. I'm choosing them." The room froze. No one expected that tone, that conviction, that fire. For the first time, their voice wasn't trembling. It was unshakable. And in that moment, every person who once believed they could control your person realized they were wrong. This wasn't rebellion anymore. This was liberation. Your person is done bowing. They're done being silent. They're done losing you to keep others comfortable. But what's coming next is even more shocking. Your person finally admitted why your energy withdrawal broke them so deeply. They told someone with a trembling voice. They didn't leave. They protected themselves from the harm I should have shielded them from. That realization hit them like lightning. They understood that your silence wasn't abandonment, it was survival. And now, they can't forgive themselves for letting you stand alone in battles that were supposed to be fought by them. Every night, they lie awake replaying your patience, your loyalty, your softness, your presence, and then the moment you slowly slipped away because you had nothing left to give. This truth has turned their world into a battlefield where every step they take now is driven by one mission: to earn back the right to stand beside you. And listen carefully, because here comes the reveal no one is ready for. Behind everyone's back, your person is planning an action that will flip the entire story upside down. They have decided to cut ties with a specific individual who repeatedly created chaos between you and them. Someone who fed their doubts, someone who fueled their confusion, someone who tried to manipulate their emotions. Your person now sees this clearly. They said, "I was blind, but I'm not blind anymore." Their family sensed the shift, and now they're panicking, not because they care, but because they're losing control. And when people who rely on control start losing it, they get desperate. Your person isn't swayed anymore. They're cold. They're decisive. They've become someone their family doesn't recognize, someone who thinks for themselves instead of thinking for others. Now stay right here, because this is where you'll feel the shock in your chest. Your person has been gathering the courage to face you, not with excuses, not with empty promises, but with a confession that will change everything. They're preparing to tell you that your withdrawal didn't weaken them, it refined them. They became aware of every moment they took you for granted, every time they let you cry in silence, every time they allowed someone else's words to influence how they treated you. They now see that losing your warmth is the worst punishment life could ever give them, and your absence has turned them into someone who finally understands what it means to fight, not for attention, not for approval, but for love that never gave up on them until it had no strength left. And before this part ends, my beloved child, hear what I'm about to say. Your person has made their biggest decision yet, one even their family couldn't stop. They're preparing to choose you publicly, out loud, without fear, without hesitation. They're ready to admit that you pulling back wasn't the end. It was the awakening that forced them to become the version of themselves you always deserved. They know you've been waiting for action, not words. They know you've been waiting for proof, not promises. And for the first time in their life, they are ready to deliver exactly that. Stay right here. My beloved child, stay exactly where you are, because what I'm about to reveal now is the moment everything reaches a point of no return. Your person has crossed a line inside themselves, a line they can never step back over. After nights of turmoil and a lifetime of obeying their family's expectations, they finally chose the one thing their heart has been screaming for since the day your energy faded away. They stood in front of the very people who shaped their entire identity and said, "I'm done living for you. I'm choosing the person who gave me peace when this house never did." The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It was the kind that forms when truth breaks generational patterns. Their family didn't know whether to argue, cry, or beg, because they could feel it. Your person wasn't bluffing anymore. Something inside them has shifted permanently. But listen closely now, because this is where the story cuts deep. Your person confessed that your withdrawal exposed every insecurity they buried inside themselves. They said, "I didn't realize how much they endured because of us. I didn't realize they carried burdens that weren't theirs." Their voice trembled, not from fear, but from regret, so heavy, it felt like a punishment. They remembered the nights you stayed up worrying, They remembered the moments you tried to support them while their family questioned your motives. They remembered every time you held their heart, even when they failed to protect yours. And when they realized you walked away to save yourself from drowning in their chaos, something inside them broke in a way that no one around them noticed, but you would have felt instantly. That's why they are fighting now, not because they suddenly woke up, but because losing your energy stripped every illusion and left only truth behind. What happened recently, as it has been described, was not just an emotional moment, but a turning point, where feelings, once held back or quietly buried, began to surface with undeniable intensity. It wasn't something loud or performative on the outside, but internally, it carried a weight that changed the direction of how someone began to see their own emotions, their relationships, and their choices. According to what unfolded, your person found themselves in a situation where they finally confronted someone from their immediate environment who had previously influenced or shaped how they behaved toward you. This confrontation wasn't planned as an outburst, but more as a breaking point, where years of unspoken frustration, realization, and emotional clarity suddenly came together in one moment. In that exchange, they reportedly spoke in a way that surprised even themselves. It was firm, direct, and emotionally charged, not because of anger alone, but because of a deeper protective instinct that had been forming quietly over time. They expressed that you had been someone who gave them understanding, care, and emotional presence in ways they had not fully acknowledged before. And in that moment of speaking up, something shifted inside them. They began to see clearly that there were times they had not defended you, not supported you the way they should have, and not stood firm when it mattered most. That realization did not come gently. It came with emotional weight, almost like a sudden awareness of missed opportunities and unspoken responsibility. From that point forward, something in their mindset began to change. Instead of holding back or trying to keep everything balanced between different expectations and influences, they started leaning toward emotional honesty. It was described as a moment where internal resistance began to weaken. They were no longer willing to stay quiet about how they felt or continue pretending that everything was fine, when, internally, it wasn't. This shift did not happen instantly, but it became more noticeable as they began to reflect on the depth of their attachment and the meaning of your presence in their life. The idea of losing that connection or allowing it to fade into silence began to feel heavier than the fear of confrontation or change. As this emotional process continued, they reportedly started thinking more seriously about taking responsibility for their feelings and expressing them in a clearer way, not through vague reassurance or temporary emotion, but through consistent and meaningful action. There was a growing awareness that words alone would no longer be enough. If anything was to change or be repaired, it would require effort, honesty, and a willingness to face uncomfortable conversations that had been avoided before. This realization created both urgency and pressure within them, as they began to understand that delaying truth any further could lead to emotional distance that might become irreversible. At the same time, there was also a sense of internal conflict. While one part of them wanted to move forward quickly and openly, another part was still processing fear, consequences, and the reactions of people around them. Family influence, expectations, and external opinions were all part of the emotional environment they were navigating. But what stood out in this situation was that their focus began to shift away from external approval and more toward internal clarity. They started questioning whether living according to others' comfort was worth sacrificing something they were now beginning to understand as emotionally significant to them. As the emotional intensity grew, they reportedly experienced a moment of solitude that became deeply reflective. In that private space, away from external voices, they confronted their own thoughts more honestly than before. It was during this time that they began to fully acknowledge how strongly they had been affected by your absence or emotional withdrawal. Instead of interpreting it as distance without meaning, they began to see it as a response to unmet emotional needs, unspoken expectations, and moments where support or understanding may not have been fully present. This realization did not come with defensiveness, but with a quiet form of emotional accountability. They began to recall situations where you may have waited for clarity, patience, or reassurance that did not arrive in the way it should have. They reflected on how emotional imbalance can slowly build over time without dramatic arguments, often through small moments of neglect or lack of communication. In that reflection, they reportedly recognized that your emotional withdrawal was not sudden or without reason, but the result of accumulated experiences where you may have felt unseen or unsupported. This understanding created a deep emotional impact within them, leading to a sense of regret that was more reflective than reactive. From this point onward, their thinking began to shift toward repair rather than avoidance. Instead of distancing themselves emotionally or rationalizing the past, they started considering how to approach you with sincerity and accountability. This included thinking carefully about how to communicate honestly, how to acknowledge mistakes without defensiveness, and how to express feelings in a way that respects both your emotional experience and their own growth. It became less about trying to fix the past and more about taking responsibility for the present moment in a genuine way. There was also an internal recognition that change would require consistency, not just emotional intensity. They understood that trust, once affected, cannot be restored through words alone. It requires behavior, patience, and time. This understanding brought a more grounded perspective to their emotional state. Instead of idealizing outcomes, they began focusing on what it actually means to show emotional maturity. This included the willingness to listen, to accept responsibility, and to step away from influences or patterns that may have contributed to emotional distance in the first place. As part of this internal shift, they reportedly began distancing themselves from external influences that had previously shaped or affected their decisions. This was not described as a dramatic separation, but rather a gradual emotional and mental realignment where they started prioritizing their own understanding over external opinions. It reflected a growing sense of independence in their emotional decision-making, where they were no longer relying heavily on others to define what they felt or what they should do. Instead, they were beginning to trust their own emotional awareness more deeply. Alongside this, they began preparing mentally for a future conversation with you. This was not described as impulsive or casual, but as something they were thinking about carefully and repeatedly. They were considering not just what to say, but how to say it in a way that reflects sincerity rather than pressure. They were reflecting on tone, timing, and emotional responsibility, aware that the way they communicate would matter just as much as the message itself. This preparation was less about rehearsing perfection and more about trying to ensure honesty is expressed clearly and respectfully. What stands out most in this entire situation is the internal transformation that appears to be taking place. It is not a sudden change or an emotional reaction that will fade quickly, but rather a gradual awakening to accountability, emotional depth, and clarity about what truly matters to them. They are beginning to understand that real connection is not maintained through silence or hesitation, but through openness, consistency, and emotional courage. At the core of all of this is a growing recognition that meaningful relationships require effort from both sides, but also responsibility from within. They are now facing the reality that avoiding difficult conversations or delaying emotional honesty only creates more distance over time. Because of this, their mindset is shifting toward taking initiative, expressing themselves more clearly, and no longer allowing fear or external pressure to fully dictate their actions. In the end, what is unfolding is a process of emotional awakening and personal reflection. It is not a guaranteed outcome or a fixed direction, but a moment of clarity where someone is beginning to understand the depth of their feelings and the importance of acting with sincerity. Whether this leads to reconciliation, understanding, or simply closure will depend on what follows next, but what is already clear is that silence is no longer the place they want to remain in.